can you confirm? Because I cannot. Natalia, can you see my screen in full? Okay, perfect. Yes, you can see it. So today we have quite a rich agenda. I think first of all, I will start my quick and short presentation to explain you the scope and objectives of this activity, the collecting compilation of those threshold values across the world, and also what are the next steps and why we decided to work on this. Thank to all members who actually involved in sharing those information representing their countries. I see many of members who supported us in this journey are here today. And then we're going to go ahead and explain what our partners, Aragon and Common Forum, did and what they're actually doing, what's their focus on in this activity, because we're not the only ones who are actually doing this. We have Common Forum is at Aragon. I know European Environment Agency is also doing the same task. So in order to avoid replications, it's quite essential that we work hand by hand and collaborate with each other, so we can go together much faster. And then obviously, moving on from Common Forum and Aragon, which represent most of the European Union, we decided to invite some speakers outside the European Union to represent their threshold values in their country and how they were developed, derived, and how they're implemented. Today, I have an honor to invite on board representative from Russia Federation to explain how threshold values in Russia were derived and are used, but also in China. And I'm pretty sure in the next upcoming workshops, we're going to have more countries stepping in and explaining the procedure, because values is just the numbers, but what stands behind those values is much more important. And after that, we're going to have a hopefully very rich discussion, open discussion, where I invite all of our participants to join and perhaps represent their country who was not mentioned in my presentation today, and build on the next step. What needs to be done next? As I said, values is just one thing, but how those values were derived is completely different reality that we have to face and understand. And hopefully, we're going to have a very solid, remarkable conclusions that will be delivered by Professor Ravi Naidu, INSOP chair. So just a quick overall picture of who we are again. Our network consists of the steering committee. There's just 7 of us. Each of us are responsible for the working group. 4 working groups that we're running here: assessment, monitoring, remediation, and food safety. Food safety is mostly working with farmer communities and developing materials to train farmers on preventative measures of soil pollution. But here for the assessment working group, excuse me, that's where this activity comes in, the threshold values activity. Now, last year, during the annual meeting, what was held online June last year, all INSOP members and the steering committee decided that we need to focus on one of the specific priority, which is to advocate for the development of global harmonized methods, including SOPs, to identify and measure soil pollutants. Right now, we're focusing on developing pesticide residue, how to measure pesticides in the soils. And the second activity, excuse me, that's priority 2 here, is to advocate for creating a global database on soil pollutant threshold values, not only in agricultural soils, but also in other land uses, focusing right now just on heavy metals and pesticides. Now, we have many different contaminants to deal with, but for now, we cannot target everything. So we decided to focus and start with the ones that we have most knowledge: heavy metals and metalloids and pesticides. Specific activities for that is to better understand the existing threshold values across the world and identify gaps, countries that don't have anything, and work together collaboratively with partners, with members, to develop a database on global technical report on those threshold values. Again, not just displaying the values, but explaining the process and the risk assessment, how those threshold values have been derived. The thing is that we need to identify what are the threshold values. Now, if you're going to go into the literature, you will find many definitions of them, starting with soil guideline values, screening values, soil standards, action values, trigger, target values, acceptable concentrations, intervention values, cleanup, threshold, etc., etc. So I can continue. I think you can complement this list. So for us, it was quite important to define and agree on a definition. And therefore, we prioritized those 2 definitions. The first one, we start with the screening values, which we defined according to the FAO and UNEP report that we developed in 2021, and INSOP steering committee agrees with this. The screening values are the values above which additional investigation or risk assessment is required to determine whether the risk is acceptable or not. And we also work on intervention values, which for us means that values above which remediation or risk management actions are required. It means that they represent an unacceptable risk and there's a requirement for certain remediation and risk management action. These are the definitions that we stick to, and we try to be consistent with these two. And we understand that different countries have either both screening values and intervention values, which is the case for some of the countries that we discovered, or most of the countries have just one definition, one values, either intervention or screening. We still need to investigate how they derive with this. Based on those definitions and several consultations with our members, we developed this template that we send to our members to let us know whether their country has those threshold values, focusing on different land uses. The land uses that we prioritize for now are residential, industrial, and of course agricultural, because at the end we're a food and agriculture organization. And we also gave option for additional land uses so that to discover and understand if other countries, for example, in Germany, they have a lot of different land uses among those three that you just see here on the screen. We also defined specific contaminants that we're focusing on, as I said, heavy metals and metalloids, but also pesticides that are the most common that are used in agriculture. So based on this template that we derived, we send it to our members and also partners, Common Forum and Aragon, to help us collect the information from various countries. This is the map showing what we have collected. So the green countries are those marked here that we collected and compiled the threshold values from those countries. Now you can see here, most of the Europe is green, which is good, but we also have some other countries that you can see here representative. You can also see many countries that are still gray, which means that we did not receive any information either because threshold values simply do not exist in these countries, which is the case for many African countries, or simply because we don't have a strong and good connections either through INSOP network to understand whether those threshold values exist. For example, India, Argentina, Peru, you can see here, Thailand, we still have a gap because we haven't heard anything from our members. So our next approach is to understand from global soil partnership focal points, which are usually ministries of agriculture or the ministries of environment, whether these countries really have their threshold values or not. As I said, this work has been done in partnership with our friends Common Forum and Aragon Project, who supported us significantly in collecting information from European countries. So a big thanks to Dietmar and Natalie and Ksenia and the rest of the team for making the European Union green. But also to our members that I would like to use the opportunity and thank here. We received also from the European region members who supported us in collecting information from Czechia, from Denmark, Germany, Greece, France, Israel also here, although Israel is not part of the European Union, in FAO it's classified as Europe, so we thank very much for Israel, Italy, Netherlands, Poland, Russian Federation also support us a lot in this, Switzerland, Ukraine as well, and the United Kingdom. Those are the members that I would like to acknowledge and use the opportunity to thank them. But also other regions, not just Europe, as I said, we're going beyond European region. And so we also receive threshold values and a big contribution also received from Australia, from People's Republic of China, Japan, Laos, Pakistan, and Vietnam. And also from South Africa, we received a support from our Russian member who helped us to collect information from South Africa. And also from Americas, we received threshold values from Brazil, Mexico, and also from the MENA region, Jordan. And I'm pleased to know that United Arab Emirates just developed their threshold values this year. although I cannot share them, but they will be available very soon. So thank you very much to all members for their support and compilation of those threshold values. What is next? So next, we need to make sure that countries that we compile all the information from other countries. So as I said, we still have a lag from those countries that I mentioned here. So we need to investigate either through INSOP members if they are here from those countries, or as I said, through the global partnership focal points, whether those countries have the real threshold values at the national or regional level, in order to make sure that we really have a global picture represented. Next, we also need to understand, as I said, these are just the numbers, but how those numbers derive is the next and most important step for us to see and understand. We need to see and describe the differences in the approaches used for derivation of these threshold values in different countries, how those values been derived, and whether all major pathways of human exposure as well as environmental exposure been taken into account when they derive them and calculate the risk assessment. So this is very important activity for us to investigate jointly. And I hope that next year, well, yeah, because this year is quite almost the end, we will have at least some of those questions to be answered. And also, for those countries who doesn't have anything at the national or regional level, FAO and the specifically Global Partnership is willing to support those countries to derive their own threshold values based on the approach that we've already described at the FAO UNEP joint report 4 years ago on how to develop those threshold values. Of course, if the countries are willing to do this. We know that some countries, for example, Malaysia, uses threshold values derived by the US, or Colombia use the threshold values derived from Mexico. So we want to know whether they really want to keep up with those threshold values from other countries, or they want to implement their own. And that's where GSP and INSOP experts can mobilize together and support those countries in the next step. Well, that's basically a big kind of a presentation from my side that I would like to share with you and show the progress of what has been done, but also what needs to be done next, that we can discuss in an open discussion after the full presentation will be delivered in the next hour or so. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please feel free to note them now, and we will address them immediately in the open discussion. I'm going to have about 40 minutes to address those and other questions that you may have. That's it from me. Natalia, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sergio. So let's open the floor if there are any pressing questions you want to raise, or issues you want to raise, Naya, before we pass to the next speaker. Just feel free to raise your hand if you have anything you want to mention before we start. No? Okay. Then let's move on to the next presentation. It will be done by Natalie Brills from ARC Consulting about the Aragon Horizon project and the work in the threshold values compilation. Natalie, let me know if you have any issues sharing your screen. No, I see.
I'm gonna try. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Just put presentation mode. Yeah. Perfect.
Okay.
Great. You can go ahead.
Thank you for the introduction. And also I would like to thank the organizers of the workshop to allow us to present the work of Aragon in relation to the threshold values. So as was already said, my name is Natalie Brills. I work at ARC Consulting. We are a consulting company based in Belgium, and we are one of the 17 partners of the Aragon project. And together with my colleague Steen van Hees, who is also attending the workshop today, we compiled the soil threshold values for Europe. A little bit about the Aragon project. Aragon is an acronym for Achieving Remediation and Governing Restoration of Contaminated Soils Now. It's a Horizon Europe project. It was kicked off in last year in October 2023, so it's been running for a year now. and it will run for another 3 years until 2027. And the project falls under the EU mission, A Soil Deal for Europe, which is the ambition of the European Union to transition to healthier soils by 2030. This is an overview of the consortium. We are, as I already mentioned, 17 partners from 12 different European countries. And to get an overview of where all of the partners are from, you can see a European map on the top right there. The project is coordinated by Xenia Trier from the University of Copenhagen and Hans-Peter Arp from the Norwegian Geotechnical Institute. And we are partners from different backgrounds. So we have academic institutions, SMEs, industry partners, but also public authorities. And, the project has 4 main objectives. So the first objective is to map contaminated sites in Europe. And within the project, we focus on 4 large contaminant groups. That's metals, PFAS, organochlorine and organobromine contaminants, and petroleum and coal substances. A second objective is to evaluate remediation and immobilization techniques. So we have partners working on that, both through a scientific literature study, but also lab testing that's going on at the moment. And then we have a group of partners who is specifically investigating soil resilience and ecological restoration of soil after remediation to assess the impact that remediation has on the soil. And finally, we are to develop a risk assessment framework that can be used for stakeholders dealing with contaminated land. And this will be mostly in the form of guidelines that will not only include how to perform a chemical risk assessment, but also information on socioeconomic analysis and the different remediation options that exist. And all of this to avoid a regrettable remediation, because of course remediation can be a solution to contaminated land, but it's not always the most desirable option, or different remediation techniques might be more suitable than others, depending on the contamination. So how are we doing that? We are looking at specific case studies. We have selected 9 European sites that are contaminated, where we will use to develop this risk assessment framework. And we will do that in strong collaboration with the stakeholders. So we also have a co-creation work package. So that's also a large focus of the Aragorn project, especially because in the end, we want to deliver something that as well private as public land managers can use to prioritize, plan, and make an informed decision on what to do with their contaminated land. So within the Aragorn project, why did we actually do the compilation of the soil threshold values? Initially, is it because we are going to develop this risk assessment framework? And in an initial risk assessment, we want EU stakeholders to be able to compare their soil concentrations with their national legislations or their national legislative values. And a second reason why we looked into soil threshold values is because we wanted to see if the analytical methods that we possess within the consortium, if they are sensitive enough to even compare with the national threshold values. And while we were doing that, we were actually lucky that we are now in this momentum where we have a legal framework on the European table for soil protection that is called the Directive on Soil Monitoring and Resilience. So while we were doing this compilation and talking to different organizations about our work, we noticed that there was a big interest in this work. In Europe, in the framework, of course, of this future soil monitoring law. Also, we are very happy to collaborate on a more global scale with INSOP on this matter, because we realized at some point that many different organizations were doing this work in parallel. And we think that it's very critical to collaborate with the other organizations to prevent duplicative efforts. And we are, of course, very happy to share our data with INSOP. And also the same goes in the other way. We are also very happy to receive feedback from INSOP members that could validate our work as well. So while INSOP is working towards the comprehensive global database and report, we will be happy to contribute with and provide the insights that we gained from a European perspective. How did we go about compiling the EU soil threshold values? We had a very nice starting point, which was a publication from the European Environment Agency published in 2023 on soil indicators and soil threshold values. And this the report was about more than soil pollution, but it gave a good overview of work that had already been done on this topic. And also it gave already a nice summary on the commonalities and differences that currently exist between European countries. And it made a reference to a very important work that was published by the GRC in 2007. And that was edited by Carlon et al., which is a very elaborate description of 14 or 15 different European countries and how their risk assessment frameworks work in different countries, including how the soil threshold values are derived, and a listings of these soil screening values or soil threshold values. And this was published by the Heracles framework, which was founded in the early 2000s, already to convert or to stimulate convergence of the risk assessment procedures between the different European countries. But of course, this document was already 17 years old, so some of the values had already been updated in the meantime, and to be able to get the most recent values, we made use of the FOULEX databases to get access to the different national legislations. And of course, these legislations, they are in the different national languages, which thanks to good translation software, we're able to extract the important information. But of course, some nuances probably got lost in translation. So we were very happy to get the help of the International Consortium of Aragon to validate the values for some of the countries. And I would also like to thank Dietmar Müller-Grabherr to reach out to the Common Forum members, and also to thank the Common Forum members who contributed to validate these soil threshold values for some of the countries. And before I move on to some of our findings, I would like to note that as was already mentioned by Sergejus, the derivation methods of the value are very important, a very important aspect, but this was unfortunately out of the scope of Aragon. So for the aim that we needed the soil threshold values for, so we didn't look into that. However, during our search for the values, we observed that there were definitely some differences between European countries. This is what I will present to you now. So here you can see a map of the 31 countries that we looked for within Europe for the soil threshold values. And the red countries, for the red countries, we were able to find soil threshold values in the legislation. And there were 5 countries in orange that we did not find any soil threshold values for. And these were France, Malta, Cyprus, Greece, and Luxembourg. So the reason why they do not have these soil threshold values in their legislation can differ. Some countries, they do not have specific soil legislation, and they might use values from other countries, as was already mentioned by Sergius. But for example, we know France has a different approach, and they use a more case-specific approach to the risk assessment instead of using national soil threshold values. On the left, you can see an overview of the different countries listed and the number of entries that we found in the legislation. And this does not necessarily equal the number of substances that are legislated. It also includes, for example, summation parameters or different forms of the same substance, but it already gives you a nice overview of, or a good idea of the extent of the amount of substances that are legislated in the different countries. And we can see that Czech Republic there is on the top with 130 entries in the legislation, and most of the countries they have between 40 or 80 entries. Then I wanted to say something more specific about metals and metalloids and the soil threshold values in the different countries, because this is both a common denominator and a common divider, in the sense that all of the countries that we found soil threshold values for in the legislation, they have legislated values for metals. And there are 6 metals that are common for all of those countries. That's cadmium, copper, mercury, nickel, lead, and zinc. And we can see, for example, on the top there, Romania even has 21 metals included. So they have elaborated their legislation for metals. On the other hand, it's a common divider because every country has their own geology and their own pollution history. So also the different countries, they tend to have a different derivation methods for metals also. And what was surprising to us was that we didn't find any soil threshold values for metals in the Spanish regulation. But luckily, after validation or with the Spanish national expert from the Common Forum, we got the information that we had to look for the Spanish metal values in the legislation from the autonomous regions, because Spain has transferred the responsibility for the development of these values to the autonomous regions. Partially because of this large difference in geological background values between these regions. We also noticed that 17 out of 26 countries, they make a distinction in land use. The most common land use categories, they are in industrial areas, recreational areas, residential areas, agricultural areas, nature areas, but also some countries, they derive specific values for children's playgrounds because of the sensitivity of the life stage. Then we had a few countries like Portugal, we can see there on the top, that makes a distinction between 9 different land use categories that can be very specific. So they make a distinction between land that is with or without the use of subterranean water, and also sites that are within or further away from 30 meters from a surface water body. And then for some countries, the land use distinction can be also very vague on the other side. Some countries, they define special zones, or they simply make a distinction between sensitive or less sensitive land use area. And we can see there at the bottom that still 9 European countries, they do not make any distinction in land use. And of course, this land use distinction can be related to the protection goals. So for example, if you derive a value for nature areas, it would be possible to only take into account the ecotoxicological data, or for industrial recreational potential areas to specifically look at the human toxicological data or so on. So it's usually the land use derivation is related to some kind of protection goal. Then we've noticed some other approaches. For example, in Germany, they make a distinction between the soil-human pathway and the soil-crop pathway. So the soil-human pathway, it describes derives threshold values for direct exposure to soil, while the soil-crop pathway, it derives values for transfer through the food chain through agricultural crops. We've also noticed that some countries use a tiered approach, was also already touched upon by Sergejus. And let's not go into the nomenclature here, but we've noticed that some countries also make a distinction between an acceptable value below which there is no risk or no concern, a warning value which would trigger further investigation, and an action value which actually urges some hazard management or remediation action. Then we found also that 9 countries, they make a correction for soil characteristics some way in their, already incorporated in their threshold values, or they allow for a site-specific calculation due to some formula to adjust the soil threshold value for the soil characteristics. So there can be correction for pH, clay content, total organic carbon content, and for example, Poland even has the distinction between high permeable or permeable soil and low permeable soil. And then to finalize my presentation, I would like to come back to the fact that we have the directive on soil monitoring and resilience currently on the European table. And within Europe, I think we are moving towards some degree of harmonization between the European countries. So the current situation is as visualized on the left, that each EU member state chooses if and how to set the soil threshold values. And this actually leads to a situation where the different countries might end up with different risk estimates, even though the situation might be comparable. So a way that we could improve this situation as it is now is, for example, to start a repository with the national soil threshold values that is kept to date. Could be one option, but I think that it would be a good evolution to move towards some kind of harmonization in the sense of soil threshold value derivation, so that at least there is a common guideline on how to go about this, the derivation in the different countries. So that was it for me. I would like to